ಸರ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು 5 ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್ ವೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ ಸರ್.
Hello, Sidhu sir. You can share, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you can start. Already a good number of people have joined.
SRM, can you introduce yourself?
Start the session.
Pardon? Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
At the outset, I would like to thank you for sparing your valuable time. I think your talk will definitely encourage and help for all the faculties. Basically, they're all young teachers. So definitely will help, sir. Thanks for your valuable time and giving the slot in the afternoon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Aishwarya, you can start with the formalities, whatever things are there.
Good afternoon, one and all present here. We have the afternoon session by Dr. Rohan Bise, sir. Rohan Bise, sir, his academic qualification, that is, he has completed MBBS, MD, and DM. So currently he is working as consultant medical oncologist since 2013 in KLE's Dr. Prabhakar Kore Hospital and MRC. Sir has completed his MBBS degree in the year 2004 from JM Medical College, Belgavi. MD in the year 2008 from Karnataka Institute of Medical Sciences, Hubli. And DM from Pitbai Memorial Institute of Oncology, Bangalore. That is an area of study that is medical oncology. Sir has got professional experience, that is as a consultant physician from 2008 to 2013 in KLE's Dr. Prabhakar Kore Hospital, and also consultant medical oncologist, that is KLE's Dr. Prabhakar Kore Hospital and MRC from 2013 till date. Sir is also involved in various clinical trials such as solid tumor, peptide, genopep, MBC, ovarian cancer, small cell lung cancer, multiple myeloma. Sir has also been trained with ICF GCP. With this brief introduction, I welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Share
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction. So the topic allotted to me is challenges in clinical trials. So to brief regarding clinical research. So it's a research involving humans to examine physical, mental or behavioral attributes of an individual or a group of people. The aim is to collect information that contributes to our collective memory and knowledge about individuals and groups of people. So clinical trials is a type of clinical research. So the aim of which is to evaluate the effects of an intervention on biomedical or health related outcomes. So if you have an intervention, it becomes a clinical trial. The function of this clinical trial is not discovery of a new drug or a new therapy. Okay, but the function of clinical trials is to separate the relative handful of discoveries which prove to be true advances in therapy from a legion of false leads and unverifiable clinical impressions, and to delineate in a scientific way the extent of and the limitations which attend the effectiveness of drugs. So basically, if you look at how a drug reaches clinical usage, so you have drug discovery first, followed by animal trials, coming on to clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, followed by drug approval and clinical usage, and there can be phase 4 clinical trials, which is done after the drug is approved. Okay, so the major steps in conducting a clinical trial are the design, conduct of the study, analysis of the data, and in the end, reporting of the findings in that particular clinical trial. So these randomized trials, phase 3 randomized clinical trials, are gold standard for analyzing and evaluating the efficacy, safety of medical devices or pharmaceutical drugs. The most challenging part of conducting a randomized trial are related to handling ethical and the regulatory issues. Okay, so this is what I discussed earlier. This is how a particular drug is developed. Okay, first you find a new drug. Okay, you synthesize and purify the drug and use it in preclinical animal testing. And once you think animal studies are okay, if you find that the drug to be effective and safe in animals, you come to the phase clinical studies. So you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. So as discussed earlier, phase 3 studies are the ones which lead to drug approval. Sometimes if clinical data is very good and if the disease is such that a treatment is warranted, sometimes even phase 2 studies can lead to drug approval, but commonly phase 3 studies are the ones which lead to drug approval. And after the drug is approved, it starts getting clinically used and you have a phase 4 data, so which is obtained in phase 4 studies. Okay, so the organizations involved in drug development. So you have FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. You have sponsors. So sponsors generally could be pharmaceutical companies or sponsors can be academic institutions. And so you have contract research organizations which are involved in drug development. So coming to the challenges. So we have a lot of trials coming to developing countries like India. Okay, so the reason is because the challenges which are present in the global market or the developed market. So if you look at the clinical trial environment, so there is a lot of social, demographic, and economic things. So in which pharmaceutical industry operates, and there is an ongoing transition in all these things. So developed economies have a very high healthcare expenditure cost, and they are looking at decreasing the healthcare expenditures. So the laws there are very strict. So strict laws for approval of a particular drug, and because these are highly costly there, the high cost threatens the sustainability of the pharma industry there and the prevailing business model there. So we as developing countries act as emerging markets. So specifically a country like ours has a very huge domestic market. So we have a very good product development skill, scientific manpower, and hence we can offer a solution to the global pharma industry to address the challenges of drug development and innovation. So specifically, if you look at the current trials, maximum trials are happening in BRIC countries. So that is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, because we offer a cost advantage. So we can execute trials at cost around half the cost that are present in US. So why is India an attractive site for conducting clinical trials? So we have a very huge population. So because of this huge population, so we have variety of diseases where we find that patients have not received any treatments. So we have a sizable population of treatment naive patients. Okay. Second, so we have a significant number of people who can speak English, who are highly skilled and who are highly trained. So if you look at the physician population in India, the physician population is huge. So if you look at healthcare institutions, the number of healthcare institutions is increasing across the country. If you look at the policy of the present government, so the present government wants a medical college in each and every district of India. So we have large hospitals with considerable patient load and facilities to undertake the present clinical trials. So because of availability of good communication networks, specifically the penetration of internet in India and the information technology capabilities, so there can be dissemination of information very rapidly from India. So if you look at the present day accredited central laboratories, the list of these accredited central laboratories is fast expanding. Enrollment rates as compared to other countries is good in India. The patients generally are compliant, and so that generally there is a ease of retaining those patients across the trials. Okay, so as discussed earlier, so we can conduct clinical trials at approximately half the cost in India. So we have infrastructure to manage the other tasks involved. So especially data entry, data management, analysis, and report writing. So the regulatory environment in India has improved. So we have revised national guidelines for biomedical research and hence, okay, so we find that conducting trials now is easier than it was few years back. Okay, so if you look at the global scenario, so there are negative perceptions associated in the minds of participants in a clinical trial and the stringent regulatory requirements in developed countries, so which is pushing this clinical research to developing countries. So we find that the major pharma companies specifically involved in a lot of research and development, they have their research and development in Western countries and they conduct trials across the developing countries. So this is a slide showing the cost of conducting trials across the countries. So if you look at the Western countries, specifically Germany, okay, so the cost is huge. If you compare this with India, so we do trials at 1/3 the price of a clinical trial in Germany. So if you compare US, we conduct clinical trials at half the cost, and that is leading the companies to bring their clinical trials to India. Okay, so what are the other capabilities in India as compared to other studies, other countries for clinical trials? So if you look at investigators, so we have a large number of specialists in different therapy segments, and majority of us so would be trained in English. So our English would be good. So if you look across all over India, so majority of the physicians are good English speaking. So the training here is advanced training. Okay, so and we can compare the training in India with US or Europe. So the treatment protocols that we follow. So if you speak of oncology, so generally whatever protocols are followed in US are the protocols that are followed in India. So we do not have a different protocol system to be followed in India. So the clinical protocol to manage routine patients, okay, is in line with the treatment protocols in US, and that helps us to go ahead with trials for new drugs in India. Okay, so if you look at the investigator sites, majority of them are ICH and GCP compliant. If you look at the patient population, so we have a huge population, so which is diverse and therapy naive. So they would not have received any treatment for their present illness. So if you look at the patient population, so it is diverse with respect to genetic varieties also. So we have India being a huge country. So if you look at the genetic varieties of people that we have, so there is a lot of genetic disparity all across India. Okay, so we have a large patient pool, especially in the chronic disease segment. Okay, so chronic disease, by that I mean say diabetes, hypertension, lifestyle diseases, HIV and oncology patients. Okay, so the patient pool is huge. Okay, and as discussed earlier, so because of the changing lifestyle patterns, there is an increase in number of patients in the segment of lifestyle disorders specifically. Okay, so diabetes, hypertension, and because of again the lifestyle changes that we are undergoing, so there is an increase of cancer patients, and hence we have a lot of trials in oncology in India. So if you look at the clinical research infrastructure, so we have more than 200 medical colleges, 22,000 graduates coming out per year from these medical colleges, around more than 15,000 hospitals, 14,000 diagnostic labs, 7 lakh research scientists and engineering graduates coming out per year, and world-class medical lab facilities at generally the tertiary and the secondary sectors in India. So this was what I was discussing earlier. These are the stages of a drug approval. First, you find that a new drug is discovered, which undergoes preclinical testing in animal models. Then you get permission to conduct a clinical trial. Okay, and then you start a human clinical trial. So as discussed earlier, phase 3 clinical trial is supposed to lead to registration of a new drug. The new drug is launched, then you have a phase 4 study, which is called as post-marketing surveillance. Okay, so coming to the present topic today. Okay, so what are the challenges of medical research in India? Okay, so if you look at the first thing, so we have a lack of research teaching. So if you look at our curriculum, especially the medical curriculum, okay, so though we have a lot of scope for learning statistics, the way research is conducted is not taught in the undergraduate curriculum at least. So once we become postgraduates, even there, the teaching is specific to the field that we select. But yes, again, exposure to research is very minimal. So there is generally a lack of research teaching in the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Then coming to research funding. Okay, so even if I know the research methodology, okay, I don't know from where I should be funding my research. So even that idea is not present when we complete our postgraduate degrees. So there is a lack of funding agencies in India. And as discussed earlier, okay, so even if there are funding agencies, knowledge of application process to get this funding is not known to majority. And so towards research, if you look at the R&D cost, the R&D research and development funding is very less in India as compared to other countries. Thirdly, so if I am a student here, so doing my undergraduate or postgraduate course, so I would want a role model for me to get to know about research. So if I look at my teachers earlier, okay, so they were very good teachers. But if you look at the research mentality, we did not have that research mentality in India. And hence, so students follow teachers. So if the teacher is not research oriented, the student will also be not research oriented. Okay, so if you look at the other challenges in clinical research, the English language command. So though the English language command has substantially increased now, but it is still a hurdle for conducting clinical trials in India. The last thing, interdisciplinary collaboration. Okay, so if you look at research, it's not a single departmental thing. So multiple disciplines should be involved. So if you look at oncology, we have multiple disciplines. So resulting, so a research discipline followed by a clinical discipline, and in the clinical discipline you have three different clinical fields. You have radiation, you have chemotherapy, you have surgery. So this interdisciplinary collaboration doesn't exist in India. In fact, it has not evolved in India. So we find that majority of the drugs approved in Western countries or protocols approved in Western countries are through multiple institutes. Okay, so they collaborate, they design a clinical trial, they collaborate with each other, design a particular multi-treatment protocol, and they go through that protocol strictly for all the patients. And when they find that the results are very good, then they bring out the protocol, okay, for general usage. This interdisciplinary collaboration, okay, is lacking in India, and that is what is resulting in a lack of research mindset in our country. Okay, so if you look at the clinical trial enrollment targets in India, 48% of the clinical trials miss their enrollment targets. 85% of the trials are delayed. Okay, so in 58% of the trials, the endpoints in trials have doubled. Okay, and in 70% of the clinical trials, the clinical data collected is in unstructured data sources. So to analyze a data, okay, so the data that needs to be maintained should be very structured so that analysis becomes simple. But if it is analyzed in an unstructured manner, the analysis also will be very difficult. Okay, so coming to elaboration of the key challenges. Okay, so trials require cooperation of all the stakeholders, including the sponsors like the pharma industry, academia like the medical colleges or the university, the government, which requires to provide us with a very good environment for research and development. Non-profit organizations, again important, because some research, especially research involving treatment in the poorest of the poorest people, requires some sponsoring from the non-profit organizations to conduct research, to involve those people in their clinical trials, to educate them regarding the importance of enrollment in a clinical trial. Okay, and this can also be done by the patient advocates. Then investigators. Okay, so as the sponsorship is important, likewise, to find clinical investigators who can conduct a particular clinical trial in a particular field is very important. Again, so without patients, okay, so we cannot do trials. So you require a proper patient pool. Okay, the problem with having a patient pool is, okay, so we end up not maintaining data of our patients. So if you look at multiple hospitals, especially the smaller hospitals in India, so generally it is not a online patient data which is available. Okay, so it's not a computerized data system. Everything happens on with a pen and a paper, and hence we end up losing a lot of patient data, and we do not have those patients for recruitment in clinical trial. So again, so you require physicians and you require regulators in conducting the clinical trial. Okay, so this cooperation amongst all of these stakeholders is important. Okay, further, so if you look at the time and financial demands of clinical practice. So if you look at our practice in India, majority of the doctors in India are overworked. Say if I am practicing in US, so I would end up seeing 6 patients, 10 patients a day, not more than this. So if I see such limited number of patients, I can give quality care to these patients, and after I finish those patients, I can provide some time for clinical research. So if you look at our practice here, okay, so the patient pool is huge. Okay, so you end up giving entire time to patient management, and you have a lot less time left for clinical practice. The shortage of specialists. Okay, so though, okay, so we have such a huge number of medical colleges. Okay, so if you look at the postgraduate doctors, okay, so the number is still less. So there is still a shortage of specialists, especially in the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities. The increasing complexity of regulations. So we require a streamlined regulatory body which can approve our trials in a perfect manner. There should be timeline for regulatory approval of the studies. The contracts can happen between the sponsorer, the investigator, and the hospital where the investigator plans to complete the trial. So the contracts also. So if I don't know how to complete a contract, it becomes difficult for me to go through a contract. The other thing is the lack of supportive infrastructure. So there are multiple small hospitals in India. So if you look at, so whether they have infrastructure to go ahead with a clinical trial, the answer would be no. So clinical trials require a lot of supportive infrastructure. So this infrastructure can be provided in universities, medical colleges, but in small hospitals, it's very difficult to have supportive infrastructure for a clinical trial. The other thing which was discussed earlier is inadequate research training. So we as undergraduates, postgraduates are not trained in conducting clinical research, though we have something called as thesis. So where we study a particular disease, so involve patients in those studies, complete our thesis. We have some statistics involved in thesis, but yes, so the seriousness, so during this process is lacking, and hence, so the training in itself, okay, so for research is very inadequate in India. Okay, so then enjoyment from participating in a clinical trial. So if I am a clinical research specialist, so I would want to enjoy the entire process of starting a trial, recruiting patients for a trial, completing trial, and the post-trial follow-up for the patients. So unless I enjoy my participation in a clinical trial, okay, so I would not end up being a good research physician. Okay, so there are increasing business aspects now. Okay, so there is a lot of pressure from the CROs to recruit patients, and so this pressure should not be present for a clinical research physician. Then you have data challenges. So, okay, so if you complete a trial without maintaining a correct clinical data, so the trial would end up being a failure. So data collection needs to be in a proper way. There should be some quality control for the trial. Okay, and this pay for performance thing again creates a lot of pressure in conducting a clinical trial. So multiple timelines are given for patient recruitment. One, second, okay, so they want a particular number of patients from a particular site. This creates a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on the person conducting clinical trial. So what are the challenges for an investigator? Okay, so investigator alone is not sufficient to conduct a trial. He requires a lot of supporting staff. Okay, and this is where we lack. So we have inadequate infrastructure. So some sites can have a good adequate staff, but yes, so if you look at the staff in multiple research sites, there is a high turnover. Okay, so by that I mean, okay, so people get trained, okay, and then there is a lot of attrition. They keep on shifting their trial sites, and so you have a high turnover of junior staff. So train another person. So when a clinical trial is ongoing, is very difficult. Second, the myth of numbers. Okay, so if you look at the situation everywhere in India, so you have a very poor doctor-patient ratio. So our doctor-patient ratio is very less. We have very few doctors for the patient population that we have. So we end up spending a lot of time on seeing our patients. So it's good for a patient, but yes, okay, so we have very less time left for research because, okay, so we end up spending majority of time for our clinical patients. Okay, so because the number of patients seen by a physician is huge, there is a compromise in quality of patient care. So if you look at the scenario, if I see 20 patients a day and if I have 100 patients a day, okay, so those 20, the person who has 20 patients a day would be able to give more time to each of his patients. The quality of life, the assessment of the patient's illness will be better as compared to a person who sees 100 patients a day. Okay, and along with that, so if you look at physicians practicing in a medical college or a teaching institute, so they are, apart from seeing clinical patients, they have huge teaching assignments or administrative responsibilities. So the other scenario would be a clinical investigator having multiple trials. So if a person has a lot of trials, okay, so there would always be less time for a particular trial, and this would result in one, a lack of patient care. There can be conflicts of interest, okay, so in across various trials, and because of the increased number of trials, the responsibilities may be relegated to some other persons, and this would result in less patient care in a clinical trial. Third, the knowledge, skills, and attitude. Okay, so as discussed earlier, so there is very less teaching involved in research in undergraduate and postgraduate courses. So there is a poor knowledge in good clinical practices and drug development process across the physicians in India. So there is a lack of formal training in research methodology and bioethics. There's a lack of training in pharmacovigilance. There is a very less opportunity for development of skills required in conduct of clinical trials. If I look across my education earlier during my UG and PG days, okay, so I was not exposed to the term clinical trials at all. So whereas, yes, okay, so when I did my super specialty, so I was exposed to a lot of clinical trials there. Okay, so and again, so counseling a person to participate in clinical trial is required, so in our curriculum. Okay. So there is a reduced opportunity for development of skills in the conduct of clinical trials, counseling research participants, documentation, and reporting of serious adverse events. Okay, so we need to have integrity, enthusiasm, and experience in all investigators. Okay. The other challenge comes from the routine practice. Okay, so if you look at practices in India. So though in oncology, okay, so majority of the patients are treated across in fact all over the world according to some treatment protocols, treatment guidelines that are given by institutes like NCCN or ESMO, but the same thing cannot be said of other fields. So there is a variability in the standard of care across the diseases that are treated in India. Okay. Second, documentation. So what we lack in India is documentation. So there is already a high patient load in India. Physician is burdened with seeing the patients. Okay, so the clinical care of patients. So there is very less room left for documentation. So though we see patients, though we take care of them, we end up not documenting the entire process. And this is where India lacks. So if you look at various oncology studies, okay, so the Western countries end up doing a lot in terms of new protocols, new drug discoveries, okay, effectiveness of a particular treatment regimen. And because of lack of data, even in the very good premier institutes like AIIMS or Tata Memorial Hospital, okay, so lack of follow-up data after the patient is discharged, we end up doing a lot less research because of poor documentation. Okay, again, a part of poor documentation is a lack of systematically maintained patient database. So if you have a patient database, okay, so regarding their first visit, the treatment given and follow-up of the patient, so it's always easier to bring about research, okay, than not having database. So then the administrative support. Okay, so if you look across, okay, so the government attitude for research. So for the government, research is not a priority. Okay, so some things can be understood because of the huge population that we have. So giving the initial medical care is important to the government. So and research always lags behind in India. Okay, and there is a lack of encouragement for conducting research, especially in our country. Are there any written policies? So majority of the times, so we conduct researches on the basis of ad hoc approvals. So approvals given then and there itself without having a written policy to approve a particular way. And are the decisions consistent? No. So the approvals are ad hoc and there is inconsistency in decision making. So if there is a particular method in approving a research, so it's always good to follow that particular method and to allow a person to conduct a clinical research. So there is poor support for establishment of a functional ethics committee across all the healthcare facilities in India. So if you look at private sector in India, especially the smaller hospitals, there is poor administrative backup. The infrastructure is inadequate and there is a lack of skill to manage serious adverse events. So when the hospital is small, naturally, okay, so the physicians there, the nursing staff there will be less skilled. Okay, the armamentarium available there to manage a serious adverse event could be lacking. Okay. So then there is a poor access to appropriate ethical oversight. The other issues can be non-participation in a protocol writing. Okay, so though we end up doing a lot of clinical research, the protocols are generally prepared by somebody else. So there is a need to start writing or to create an environment where protocol writing is important. Okay, so in India, majority of us physicians, okay, are doing a double role. So double role of a healthcare provider, which is generally our priority, and then an investigator. So whatever time is left behind after seeing our patients, we do research in that time. This leads to therapeutic misconception. So what we do in the healthcare setting may be different from what we do in a clinical trial scenario. And there can be a conflict of interest. So when we see a patient in a routine OPD versus when we see a patient in a research setting. Okay, so for a practitioner who is very busy, okay, so he would have very limited time for research, as discussed earlier. Okay, so there is very less support with regard to clinical research infrastructure, especially in the form of administrative and financial support. So for practitioners who become engaged in running a clinical trial and recruiting patients, their financial reimbursement per patient can be very less. Okay, so suppose I am a clinical trial physician, so I would want at least an average financial reimbursement for doing a clinical trial. But if you look across some studies, the financial reimbursement can be very less as compared to the regular practice. So if I am not earning from my clinical trials, why would I end up doing clinical trials? So for the present day physician, money is important. So and at least there should be an average financial reimbursement per patient from a clinical trial. The last thing, the challenge confronted by a practitioner would be financial disincentive for physician to refer their patients to clinical trials. Okay, so the general approach for referral to a clinical trial is that I lose my patient. So if I refer the patient for a clinical trial, the patient would not come back to me. The patient would be followed in a clinical trial, and this acts as a financial disincentive for a patient, for a physician who refers his patient for a clinical trial. Okay, so clinical trials are trials involving human subjects, and so this has become an increasingly complex environment in which to work and be successful. So every person may not be successful in a clinical trial. Some have a better success because they have a proper methodology to follow in a clinical trial. They end up recruiting more patients as compared to others. So every person, every clinical trialist is a different person. Some are more successful than the other. Some cope up with the pressures in a clinical trial better than some other. So there is a trend that fewer professionals are entering the research field than in the past, resulting in shrinking workforce. Okay, so there are multiple things which lead to this. So one, okay, so majority of the upcoming doctors are not trained in clinical research methodology. They would not know that they can be doing clinical trials. When they come out, they start working, okay, with the patients, and they become so occupied with their patients, okay, that they do not have that research attitude. Second, okay, the money that they earn from seeing their patients is far high as compared to the money that they would earn from a clinical trial. So this is what a physician who does a routine practice would think. Okay. So majority of the clinical trials, okay, earlier were conducted in an ad hoc fashion. So there was not a streamlined method, okay, to do a clinical trial. Okay, and these clinical trials were done by personnel of varying professional quality. Okay, and okay, so these personnel were recruited and trained anew at each site. By that we mean, okay, so patients, the personnel who were trained earlier, okay, so used to be there at a particular site for some years and after that leave. Okay, and the site would then require new personnel to conduct those trials, and this would result in inconsistencies in trial execution across sites. Okay, so this is the scenario everywhere. Okay, so you have a lot of personnel involved in clinical trial who become trained. Okay, and after they become trained, after they become professionally good, okay, they end up leaving that particular site. Okay, this has a lot of issues in that particular site because the person who comes next will not be as adequately trained as the person who left. Okay. For the pharmaceutical industry, so if you end up conducting a trial, okay, for a prolonged duration, this protracted timeline increases the cost of conducting a trial, decreases revenue, okay, as okay, medications have a finite life before losing patent production. So especially in my field, so you have very huge research and development happening. Okay, so every 3 months we have a new drug for a particular indication. Okay, and after a new drug comes, they have a particular patent period where they have exclusive marketing rights. Okay, so say 5 years, 10 years. Okay, and the rest of the pharma industry would want that patent period. Okay, so to have a new drug. Okay, so which is a generic. They want trials to be over before the patent period of that original molecule comes. Okay, so suppose this particular clinical trial has a timeline, so which has been prolonged, that particular pharma company would end up losing to its competitors. So timelines are very important in trials. Okay, and protracted timelines are not good for a clinical trial, not good for the pharma industry. Okay, so moreover, when a trial addresses a question important for medical practice, okay, increasing the time it takes to obtain an answer can reduce the impact of the results. So suppose, say for example, so we had a COVID epidemic earlier, and it was very important for a vaccine to be brought. So, okay, so if I end up bringing a vaccine after 3 years of the start of COVID epidemic, by that time the patients who were supposed to become critical have already become critical, they would die. And what is the use of having a vaccine later? Okay, so it was very important at the time to have a vaccine in that particular time, so that we end up preserving a lot of lives. So timelines are important. So if a drug is required to be brought at a rapid pace, okay, so the timeline should shorten everywhere. The trial approval should be very fast. The trial should complete within their particular time frames, and we need to bring out a drug so which has gone through all these trials and which can help the population. If this doesn't happen, okay, so the importance of that particular drug is lost. Coming to data collection. Okay, so if you do a trial in a proper manner, okay, so and end up not collecting data, okay, that trial would not serve any purpose. So collecting data for each participant in a clinical trial efficiently and accurately is very important, because this is the data so which is then analyzed, okay, and the results are brought up. So the data should be collected efficiently and accurately according to the objectives of the study. Okay, and this is essential for regulatory compliance. Okay, so if you don't have data, if the analysis is not proper, the entire research effort is lost. Okay, and hence data collection should be very accurate, should be very efficient for the success of the research effort. So we have something called as case report forms, CRF, so which is the tool used by investigators to collect patient information throughout a clinical trial. Okay, so standardized CRF is required because a standardized CRF will give me information, all the information about a particular patient and the trial procedures, okay, in a clinical trial. If you do not have a standardized CRF, okay, so the trial procedures would create chaos at all the study sites and the trial would be a failure. Okay. A core function of a clinical trial is finding patients, okay, so who fit the eligibility criteria. For all trials, we have inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you need to have patients who fulfill those inclusion and exclusion criteria. And if they fulfill, okay, so as a clinical trial person, it's important for me to convince the patient to participate in a clinical trial. There are a lot of misconceptions regarding participating in a clinical trial. So if you look at the NCCN guidelines for oncology, the NCCN guidelines are given by a group of oncologists in US. So it's a group of very eminent oncologists, and generally we follow the NCCN guidelines. If you look at what is written in those NCCN guidelines, so you find that it is written that, okay, so if a clinical trial is open for a particular indication, the patient should be treated in a clinical trial. So this is the advice given to the general public by the NCCN guideline leaders. So what happens here? So people here, especially the patients and their attenders, think that participating in a clinical trial is like experimenting on the patients. Okay, and they would not receive appropriate treatment. So these are the preconceived notions that we have about participating in a clinical trial. And this is a particular barrier for enrollment in a clinical trial. So to enroll a patient in a clinical trial, after finding them that they are a candidate for a clinical trial, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, so then comes to convince them. Okay, so to convince them, okay, so what we generally do is we tell them that, so this is a drug meant for a particular indication. Okay, and so this is the research behind this drug, and this drug in the earlier phase studies has given a very good result. And so the aim of the study would be to study the result in a presentation. So this is how we try to convince a patient to participate in a clinical trial. This was very difficult. So if you think of the COVID era, initially, so to get patients for COVID vaccines was very difficult. But once the initial trial data came out that a particular trial, vaccine trial is successful, so we found a lot of patients, okay, who voluntarily participated in COVID vaccine trials. So when patient recruitment is embedded, the trial is delayed. Okay, and so there are some oncology trials which are ongoing for years. Okay, and so until the number of patients required by the study protocol can be completed. So if a disease is very common, okay, so the patient recruitment is fast. If a disease is uncommon, or if the inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria are set that majority of the patients are excluded, the trial would require a lot of time for recruitment, and hence the trial will be delayed. So if the trial is delayed for a very long time, okay, so the trial results may not matter at that time. So the major ethical and societal concerns in a clinical trial. So issues can be related to ethical oversight, reluctance of individuals to serve on ethics committee. So there are guidelines for formation of the ethics committee. So, and we require people across various strata to be involved in ethics committee. And some people may be reluctant to serve on an ethics committee. These people require to have continuing formal training in bioethics. The meetings should be frequent. So especially, so the ethics committee requires some non-medical personnel to be there, and there may be lack of participation by non-medical personnel in discussions at such meetings. So in a place where there is heavy workload, so many people would not attend. There can be very less infrastructure for a proper ethics committee to be brought out in a particular hospital. There can be inadequate administrative support. So like there are standard operating procedures for a clinical trial, there should be a standardized operating procedure source for ethical clearance of a particular clinical trial. Record keeping and archiving facilities should be there across all the clinical trial sites. So there should be accreditation procedure and quality control measures for a particular trial site. Okay, and there can be a potential compromise of independence of the ethics committee in a particular setup. So those were the ethical concerns. Coming to the social concerns in a clinical trials. Okay, so for the society, the trial should be relevant. Okay, so by that we mean that the trial should be in those areas which are health priorities for that society. So if you have a trial which is not focused on a health priority in a particular society, community participation or patient participation would be very less. Second, lack of post-trial access. Okay, so we have patients who get enrolled in a clinical trial, but once the clinical trial is done, importance is not given to such patients. So post-trial treatment, post-trial follow-up is also important. So especially for those patients who are suffering with chronic diseases and hence, and this is more so for poor patients who are not followed. Okay. So the third thing is loss of voluntariness and autonomy. So we generally have patients who are poor. Okay, so they are dragged into clinical trials, dragged, telling them that they would be treated for free or they would be given some monetary these things. Okay, and once they are into this, their autonomy is gone. So they become dependent on the clinical trial system. Okay. The next thing would be lack of translation of research activity into tangible human benefits. Okay, so we have preclinical studies, phase 1 and phase 2 studies. So these are specifically meant to see whether a particular drug would give some benefit when it goes into phase 3 research studies. So only when there is a lot of benefit seen in phase 1 and phase 2 studies, so would we conduct a phase 3 studies. So if there is a research which doesn't translate into a tangible benefit to the humans, such research would not have meaning. And this can sometimes be a misconception also in the society. So they would find that this research has not benefited them. Okay, so especially in phase 3 studies, so if there is no standard of care arm, so when the standard of care arm doesn't exist, it becomes very difficult to convince a patient to enroll into a clinical trial. Okay, so this would result in lack of participation of the community in clinical trials. So we had a COVID pandemic earlier, so we faced a lot of challenges for the initiation and conduct of clinical trials during that COVID-19 pandemic. So there were delays in approval from regulatory agencies, delays between ethics submission and approval. So the ethics committee was unfamiliar with the ICMR guidelines for conduct of clinical trials during the pandemic. So ethics committee meetings were infrequently scheduled during the epidemic. So there were issues with site setups and delegation of site level responsibilities. So because in the presence of that pandemic, okay, so everything was done digitally. So there was a huge lack of previous experience with trial conduct and discussion through the digital platforms. There was a limited scope for site visits by the trial management team because there were huge travel restrictions. Okay. So, and hence, okay, the quality control measures so were not adhered to. Source data verification and ensuring data integrity by the study monitor. So who was supposed to visit very frequently, those visits did not happen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So during the pandemic, there was a lack of participation by the remote and smaller health units. There was premature recommendation for treatment without appropriate scientific data. And so there was, because of fear of getting COVID, there was a reluctance on the part of clinicians to start a clinical trial. So what can be the recommendations to overcome these challenges? There should be capacity building. So capacity building across all the stakeholders. So capacity should increase from the pharmaceutical industry with regard to research and development. Capacity should increase from the side of the academic institutes to have a proper research infrastructure, and capacity should increase with regard to clinical trial personnel. Research sites should increase. So we have a very small number of research site database in India. All the investigator sites should have accreditation. So accreditation, like we have accreditation for medical colleges, say, or educational institutes, say NAC accreditation, or hospital accreditation like NABH. So we should be having accreditation for investigator sites. GCP training should be mandatory for prospective investigators and EC members. The functioning of ethics committee can improve. Regulatory inspections can be frequent. to see whether the trials are conducted in a way they should be. There should be dynamic modifications of national guidelines based on the prevailing healthcare scenario. And so we can have awareness creation programs for building confidence of the community to get enrolled into the clinical trial. So if the community can accept enrollment in a clinical trial, like the community gets enrolled themselves. So if you look at the US, so the sponsorer and the academic institute which conduct clinical trial, so has a Google page which tells that so we are conducting such a trial. So this is the molecule. So this is the data. So for that particular molecule, it's open for everybody. And if I am a patient, so with that particular indication for a trial, I can enroll myself into the trial, so by going through the website. So awareness in the society is important for meaningful participation. I think we'll end up here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So on behalf of Department of Pharmacy Practice, I would like to thank you once again, sir, for despite your busy schedule, for sparing time and giving us information on the challenges in clinical research. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So if any participants have got any questions, you can ask. So you can drop a message in chat box. Okay, if no questions, we'll continue. So the feedback link will be sent as well as post questions. So make sure that you answer them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So there will be a feedback link sent to the chat box. So make sure you give your valuable feedback, because those who provide feedback only they will get the certificates, as well as those who provide those who answered post questionnaires. Yeah, we will send the link now. The feedback link is online, so all of you can provide your valuable feedback. It is in the chat box.
இல்ல.
Follow. Dear delegates, kindly fill the feedback form fast so that we will be sending you the post-test quiz.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Sir, I have filled the 1 to 5 and 6 a day all the feedback.
Yes, ma'am. If you have completed day 1 to day 6, then now shortly we will be sending the post test
Sir,
quiz.
how much time you will provide us to solve that questions?
No, not same, ma'am. It's little bit different questions than those. The time 15 minutes, ma'am.
I just want to ask you the time, sir.
15 minutes, ma'am. 1-5.
How much questions are there?
Only 25.
Sir, should you think कि 15 मिनट में इतनी जल्दी क्वेश्चन हो सकते हैं?
Yes, ma'am. It will be
You are taking 25 questions and just you are giving the time of 15 minutes, sir.
only MCQ questions, ma'am. True or false or.
But at least, sir, within 1 minute is needed for one question, sir, at least.
For one questions, 1 minute. Okay, ma'am. No problem. Then we'll give half an hour time.
Yeah, just you give us half an hour time so that we can solve the questions easily without thinking, and we are just like a students, we are doing 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not good, na?
Sure, madam. Sure, madam. We will give you half an hour, madam. Don't worry, madam.
Yeah. Just give us half an hour time, madam.
Sure, madam. Oh.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, good evening.
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Sir, when you will share that post quiz questions?
Yes, ma'am. Now we are sharing, ma'am.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So the post-test questionnaires link is online. So all of you attempt the post-test questionnaire and submit it by 4:45 exactly. Can anyone confirm if the post-test questionnaire link is available or not?
Yes, madam, it's available.
Yes, ma'am, it's working.
मैं ज्वाइन की थी जैसे कि कोई
Can we leave now, sir?
Madam, we will provide you the MCQs. And we have a valedictory function also, madam. You just
Oh.
wait another 5 minutes.
Okay, okay, okay.
Hello, dear participants, please fill the MCQs. Once it will be done and we'll have a valedictory function, then you can exit the meeting. Thank you. Dear colleagues, last 5 minutes for your MCQs filling. So do it quickly. Then we'll have a valedictory function. Thank you. Okay, time up now. So now we will have a valedictory function. So now end of the program. Good evening to one and all. I would like to thank, I and on behalf of Department of Pharmacy Practice and AICT sponsored QIP program, I thank our beloved principal sir, Dr. Sunil Jalalpure sir, for his continuous support for conducting of this program. I also thank our vice principal sir, Dr. M.B. Patil sir. I thank head of the department Pharmacy Practice and deputy registrar of CAHER and dean of faculty of pharmacy, Dr. M.S. Ganachari sir, for helping, guiding, mentoring and cooperation for conduct of this 1 week program. I thank special thanks to the dear delegates, colleagues and dear students for attending 1 week program, AICT sponsored quality improvement program. So we have successfully completed all the sessions without any issues. I thank one and all. So we'll send you the certificates. We will go through the attendance as well as the MCQs. So based on that, we will provide you the certificates. I thank you one and all. And lastly, I thank IT person Praveen as well as photographer Kenchappa for 1 week. They have attended and they have given us very convenient time and they have seen the all related IT. Thank you one and all. Sir is online, Dr. M.S. Ganachari sir. So over to you, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Sir, already I have given vote of thanks and it is vote to you, sir.
Okay. No, I heard that that's what you were. Some recording is going on. Just a minute.
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, if you have done all those things, it's fine. I think there should not be any. I thank and congratulate all the participants by staying for all the day from last 1 week or something. When I was going through the feedback and all the feedbacks that people have given, good or excellent or anything else. Surprisingly, when I saw that quickly, I was just going through that feedback. Any suggestion, at least in the few seconds or few minutes, I couldn't see any suggestions that was been given by the participants. It can be other way around, whether the people don't want to share or people are overwhelmed with the activities what we have conducted. Nevertheless, we appreciate all the people who stick on to our SOPs, they stick on to all the guidelines and all those things. Can I request everyone, can you put on your videos, and I request Dr. Ramesh to take a screenshot of all the participants for our records. Yeah, Sushil, I can see you. Yeah, you can unmute. I think you can.
Sushil Kumar.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening. How are you?
Fine, sir. Fine.
Nice.
It was indeed a very nice program, sir. It was nicely organized.
Yeah, thank you.
So many practical aspects and highlights, insights were given.
Right. Yeah, Jia, you are around there or?
Jia sir.
No, I think. Anyway, I request everyone to just put on your videos as already we written in the SOPs also. Okay, so that we will take one screenshot for our records. Dr. Sudha Patil, Sonali, Girish, Jessica, Shashikalam, Maitri. Yeah, anybody want to say something?
Sir, in the near future, if it is possible, sir, can arrange a conference on or workshop on pharmaceutical care concepts.
You want to arrange?
Yes, sir. I mean, I'm requesting you to, sir.
No. You want to arrange or you want me to arrange?
Sir, I want you to arrange.
Okay, most welcome. I certainly will think.
Yes.
Definitely, your request is noted. Why not? If participants are interested, definitely we will do that. Absolutely no problem. Okay.
Yes.
And you can just that Form D Colloquium we are conducting on 22nd and 23rd April.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
definitely.
You
We are
can come.
encouraging our students. Yes, sir.
No, you also come.
Yes.
Not only sending the students, you also come.
Yes, sir. Sure,
Okay, if you want, I'll talk to your principal, sir, also.
Yes, sir. Sure. Sir.
Okay. I think others are not putting on the cameras. I don't know whatever the reasons are there. As already Dr. Shashikala has completed her vote of thanks, I thank all the people for joining and wish you all the best. But the certificate and all those things we'll try to communicate in subsequent days. Right? Thank you. Thank you one and all. Bye-bye.